Okay, so, in 1996, a United States senator watched a tape of two men beating each other inside a chain-link cage, and he called it human cockfighting. His name was John McCain, and he nearly killed the entire sport. He sent letters to all 50 governors. He launched a national campaign. Within months, 36 states banned no-holds-barred fighting. Cable companies dropped the broadcast. The potential pay-per-view audience shrank from 35 million households to 7.5 million. The company behind it all, a scrappy promotion called the Ultimate Fighting Championship, was bleeding money and heading straight for bankruptcy. By the year 2000, the UFC was so broke that its owner had stripped the company down to almost nothing. There was no roster, no TV deal, no arena contracts. The website, UFC.com, had been sold off to a computer repair company called User Friendly Computers.
All that was left were 3 letters, a wooden octagon, and about a dozen fighter contracts. And then a 28-year-old boxing gym manager from Las Vegas picked up the phone and made a call that would turn that wreckage into a $12 billion empire. This is the story of how Dana White built the most ruthlessly efficient machine in professional sports, and why the people who actually fight inside the octagon barely see any of the money. Dana White was not a fighter. He was not a promoter. He was a guy who ran a boxing gym and managed 2 MMA fighters, Tito Ortiz and Chuck Liddell. But he had 2 things that mattered more than experience: conviction that the UFC could be massive, and 2 very rich friends from high school. Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta ran station casinos in Las Vegas. When White told them the UFC was for sale, Lorenzo later said his own lawyers thought he was insane. "What are you getting?" they asked. His answer? "You don't understand. I'm getting those 3 letters. Everybody knows that brand." In January 2001, the Fertitta brothers bought the UFC for $2 million. They formed a company called Zuffa, and they put Dana White in charge as president. But buying the UFC was the easy part. Making it work, that nearly bankrupted them too.
Over the next 4 years, the Fertittas poured over $44 million into the company. No profit, no growth, no mainstream attention. By 2004, they were seriously considering shutting the whole thing down. And then they made one last desperate bet.
The idea was a reality TV show. Put 16 unknown fighters in a house, let cameras follow them, and air the whole thing on Spike TV. The catch? No network would pay for it. The UFC had to fund the entire production themselves. The show was called The Ultimate Fighter, and honestly, it shouldn't have worked. Reality TV about cage fighting on a cable channel nobody watched? It sounds like a joke. But the debut episode pulled a 1.8 rating, massive for Spike TV. And then came the finale. April 9th, 2005, Forrest Griffin versus Stephen Bonnar. 3 rounds, live on national television. What happened next is, by almost every account, the single most important fight in the history of mixed martial arts. These 2 guys just went at each other for 15 straight minutes. Blood everywhere. Neither one would stop throwing. The crowd was stomping so hard the building shook. And here's the part that changed everything. People at home started calling their friends mid-fight, saying, "Turn on Spike TV right now." The ratings climbed in real time. Griffin won the decision, but Dana White walked into the cage and gave Bonnar a contract too, saying there were no losers in that fight. Within months, Spike TV greenlit a 2nd season, and this time they paid for it. By 2006, UFC 66 broke 1 million pay-per-view buys. By 2008, Forbes valued the company at over $1 billion. The Fertitta's $44 million was starting to look like the best bet in sports history. Here's where the UFC story gets uncomfortable. Because once they had momentum, Dana White and the Fertittas didn't just grow the company. They systematically eliminated every competitor in the sport. In 2006, they bought the World Fighting Alliance. In 2007, they bought Pride Fighting Championships, the biggest MMA organization in Japan. In 2010, they absorbed the WEC. In 2011, they bought Strikeforce, the last serious domestic rival standing. And that's when the economics get really dark. In every other major American sport, the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, athletes have unions. They negotiate collectively, and they take home roughly 48 to 50% of the league's revenue. That's the standard. UFC fighters? Approximately 15 to 18%. One fighter revealed he netted just $5,500 in profit from a $20,000 purse. Meanwhile, the UFC generated $775 million in revenue in just the first half of 2025. The company is now valued at $12.1 billion. The fighters have no union, no health insurance between fights, no pension. They're classified as independent contractors. Dana White's response to the idea of a fighters' union has been blunt. It's never gonna happen while I'm here. In 2016, the Fertittas sold the UFC for $4 billion. At the time, the largest acquisition in sports history. Their original $2 million investment returned 200,000%. Dana White stayed on as president, but the machine didn't slow down. It accelerated. In 2019, the UFC signed a massive deal with ESPN, $1.5 billion over 5 years. In 2023, the UFC merged with WWE to form TKO Group Holdings. And in 2025, they signed a 7-year media rights deal with Paramount worth $7.7 billion. But in 2024, a decade-long antitrust lawsuit finally reached a settlement. Over 1,200 fighters who competed between 2010 and 2017 accused the UFC of operating as a monopsony, essentially the only buyer of fighter services, and suppressing their pay. The settlement: $375 million. The average payout per fighter? $231,000. The highest? $10.3 million to Anderson Silva. But the UFC has since added arbitration clauses and class action waivers to every new fighter contract, making it nearly impossible for future athletes to bring the same kind of case. Here's what I keep coming back to. The UFC is, by almost any metric, the greatest turnaround story in modern sports. $2 million to $12 billion. A banned blood sport to a White House event. That's not just business. That's one of the most improbable success stories of the 21st century. But it was built on a very specific deal. The fighters absorbed the risk, the brain damage, the injuries, the years off their lives, and the company keeps most of the reward. Whether that deal is fair is the question the sport still hasn't answered. If this story made you rethink how professional sports really work, subscribe to Boardroom Files. I dig into the stories behind the biggest business empires every single week. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.